The morning sun cast golden ribbons across the farmers' market on 5th and Anderson, where vendors arranged their produce with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this dance 1,000 times before. The air smelled of fresh bread, ripe peaches, and the distant promise of rain that hung in the clouds gathering at the edge of the sky. Elena Rivera moved through the crowd with her shopping bag slung over one shoulder and her son Luca's small hand clasped firmly in hers, navigating the Saturday morning ritual that had become their sacred routine over the past 4 years. Elena had chosen this life deliberately, carefully, like an architect designing a structure meant to withstand earthquakes. Every decision she made was calculated to provide stability, normalcy, and above all, safety for her son. The small apartment above the bakery where she worked, the neighborhood with its tree-lined streets and friendly faces, the farmers' market visits that taught Luca about fresh food and community, these were the building blocks of the life she had constructed from the rubble of her past. A past she had run from in the middle of the night 5 years ago, her heart breaking with every mile she put between herself and the man she had loved with a fierce, consuming intensity that had nearly destroyed her. Luca tugged at her hand, his dark eyes wide with 4-year-old enthusiasm as he spotted the colorful display of bell peppers arranged in pyramids of red, yellow, orange, and green. He was a beautiful child, her son, with olive skin that tanned easily in the summer sun, thick black hair that curled at the ends no matter how many times she tried to tame it, and those eyes, those devastatingly familiar dark eyes that sometimes made her breath catch in her throat when the light hit them just right. He had her smile, her nose, her gentle temperament, but those eyes belonged to someone else entirely, someone she had spent 5 years trying to forget and failing with every passing day. She let Luca lead her toward Mrs. Henderson's vegetable stand, where the elderly woman always saved the ripest tomatoes for her favorite customers. Elena had become skilled at small talk over the years, at the kind of pleasant, surface-level conversations that revealed nothing important while making her seem perfectly ordinary. She discussed the weather, the quality of the season's harvest, the upcoming neighborhood festival, all while her mind tracked the exits, counted the faces in the crowd, and maintained the low-level vigilance that had become second nature after living with Marco Valentino for 3 years of her youth. Marco. Even thinking his name sent a complex wave of emotions through her chest. Love and fear, longing and relief, regret and gratitude all tangled together in a knot she had never quite managed to untie. Marco Valentino, the man who had swept her off her feet when she was 22 and working as a waitress in his restaurant, who had courted her with an old-world intensity that made her feel like the center of the universe, who had married her in a ceremony that brought together 200 people from his world and exactly 3 from hers. Marco, whose gentle hands on her skin could make her forget her own name, whose smile could light up a room, whose love had felt like coming home to a place she had never known existed. But Marco was also the man whose phone rang at 3 in the morning with problems that required his immediate attention, whose business associates carried guns under their expensive suits, whose empire was built on foundations she had tried desperately not to examine too closely. She had loved him completely, but she had also feared the world he inhabited, the violence that lurked at the edges of their life together like wolves circling a campfire. When she discovered she was pregnant, that fear had crystallized into something sharp and undeniable. She couldn't raise a child in that world. She couldn't watch her baby grow up thinking that fear was normal, that danger was just part of daily life, that people solved problems with threats and violence instead of words and laws. So she had left. In the middle of the night, with nothing but a suitcase and the money she had been secretly saving for 6 months, she had walked away from everything. The penthouse apartment with its view of the city, the closet full of designer clothes, the life of privilege and danger, and most painfully, the man she loved more than she thought it was possible to love another human being. She had left no note, made no explanation, simply vanished like smoke because she knew that if she tried to talk to Marco, if she looked into those dark eyes and tried to explain, he would convince her to stay. He had always been able to convince her of anything. Elena pushed these thoughts away as she paid Mrs. Henderson for tomatoes and fresh basil, accepting Luca's careful handling of the paper bag with an encouraging smile. She had made her choice 5 years ago and she had built a good life on that choice. Luca was healthy, happy, and safe. He attended a good preschool where he was learning to read and making friends. He had never witnessed violence, never heard raised voices in anger, never seen his mother flinch when a door slammed. He was growing up normal, which was all she had ever wanted for him. They moved through the market slowly, stopping at the cheese vendor where Luca liked to sample the small cubes of cheddar and Gouda, then to the flower stand where Elena always bought a small bouquet for their kitchen table. She was discussing the care of dahlias with the vendor when she heard Luca's delighted squeal and the sound of his small feet pattering away from her side. She turned quickly, her heart leaping into her throat with the instant panic that every parent knows, and saw him running toward a display of colorful peppers that someone had arranged into an elaborate tower. Time seemed to slow down in that moment, the way it does when disaster approaches with inevitable momentum. Elena saw Luca's foot catch on an uneven piece of pavement. She saw him stumble forward, arms windmilling, heading directly toward the pepper display and the person standing beside it examining tomatoes. She opened her mouth to call out, already moving forward, but she was too far away, couldn't possibly reach him in time. The man beside the pepper display reacted with the lightning reflexes of someone trained to respond to danger, dropping his shopping bag and catching Luca mid-stumble, strong hands gripping the boy's shoulders and steadying him before he could crash into the carefully arranged vegetables. Elena's relief lasted exactly 2 seconds before she registered who had caught her son, and then her entire world tilted on its axis. Marco Valentino stood frozen in the center of the farmer's market, his hands still on Luca's shoulders, staring down at the boy with an expression of such complete shock that Elena felt her knees go weak. She watched as Marco's gaze took in every detail of Luca's face, the shape of his eyes, the curve of his jaw, the specific shade of black in his hair, and she saw the exact moment when comprehension dawned. It was like watching a bomb detonate in slow motion, the realization spreading across Marco's features in waves of shock, disbelief, and then something that looked like grief mixed with fury. Marco's eyes lifted from Luca to scan the crowd, and Elena knew he was looking for her. She could have run. Every instinct screamed at her to grab Luca and disappear into the crowd, to protect the life she had built with the same desperate determination that had driven her away 5 years ago. But her feet remained rooted to the ground, and when Marco's gaze found hers across the distance of perhaps 15 feet, she couldn't look away. 5 years had changed him in subtle ways. He was still devastatingly handsome, with the kind of face that belonged on Roman coins, strong jaw, straight nose, full lips that could curve into a smile that melted hearts or flatten into a line that promised trouble. His black hair was cut shorter than he used to wear it, with a few threads of silver at the temples that somehow made him even more attractive. He wore dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and he moved with the same predatory grace she remembered, controlled power evident in every line of his body. But it was his eyes that captured her, held her paralyzed. Those dark eyes that she saw every morning in her son's face were fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel like a butterfly pinned to a board. She saw anger there, yes, but also confusion, hurt, and underneath it all, something that might have been hope. 5 years of separation collapsed in that moment, and she was 24 again, standing in their bedroom, looking at the man sleeping peacefully beside her while she memorized every detail of his face before walking out of his life forever. "Mama?" Luca's voice broke the spell. He was looking at her with concern, perhaps sensing the strange tension in the air, perhaps just wanting her to come see the nice man who had caught him. Elena forced her legs to move, crossing the distance that suddenly felt like miles, her heart pounding so hard she was certain everyone in the market could hear it. Marco hadn't moved except to release Luca's shoulders, though his hands remained outstretched as if he couldn't quite bear to completely let go. When Elena reached them, she automatically pulled Luca to her side, a protective gesture that she saw Marco register with something that looked like pain. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The market continued around them, vendors calling out prices, customers haggling, children laughing, but in their small bubble, the world had gone silent. "Elena." Marco's voice was exactly as she remembered it, deep and smooth with the faint trace of an accent inherited from his Italian grandmother. Hearing him say her name again after 5 years of silence felt like a physical touch, and she had to fight the urge to close her eyes against the wave of longing that washed over her. "Marco." Her own voice came out steadier than she expected, though she could hear the tremor underneath if she listened carefully. "I didn't know you came to this market." It was such an absurdly normal thing to say given the circumstances that she almost laughed. Marco's jaw tightened and she saw him glance down at Luca, then back up at her, 1,000 questions in his eyes that he clearly couldn't ask here, surrounded by civilians and innocent bystanders. He had always been careful about keeping his business separate from the civilian world, a line that she had appreciated even as she had hated the necessity of it. "I was in the neighborhood," Marco said, his tone carefully neutral in a way that suggested he was exercising enormous self-control. "I like to see where the restaurant's produce comes from. Quality matters." Luca was looking between them with the confusion of a child sensing adult tension without understanding it. He tugged on Elena's hand. "Mama, can we get the peppers? The pretty ones." Elena couldn't speak for a moment, her throat tight with fear and regret and the weight of consequences finally catching up to her. She felt Marco's eyes on her face, studying her with that same focused intensity he had always brought to everything, and she knew he was cataloging every change, every new line, every sign of the years that had passed. "Luca," Marco said softly, and the tenderness in his voice as he spoke their son's name for the first time nearly broke her. "That's a good, strong name." Luca beamed at the compliment, displaying the dimple in his left cheek that Elena sometimes kissed when she tucked him in at night. "It means light-bringing. Mama says I'm her light." Something flickered across Marco's face, pain, longing, anger, she couldn't tell. His hands clenched at his sides and she recognized that gesture. He was fighting for control, for the careful composure he maintained in public. When he looked at her again, the force of his gaze nearly knocked her back a step. "We need to talk." It wasn't a request. Elena had known Marco Valentino long enough to recognize a command when she heard one, no matter how softly it was delivered. "Marco, not here." He glanced around the market and she followed his gaze, suddenly seeing what he was seeing: too many people, too many eyes, too many potential witnesses or threats. Some habits died hard. "My office. Tonight. 8 o'clock. You remember where?" Of course she remembered. She remembered everything, no matter how hard she had tried to forget. The restaurant on Morrison Street, the private office on the 3rd floor with its view of the harbor, the leather couch where they had made love more times than she could count, the desk where he had worked late into the night while she read books and waited for him to come to bed. "I can't just, Luca needs," she was fumbling for excuses, for any reason to delay the confrontation that she had known for 5 years was inevitable if she ever crossed paths with Marco again. "Bring him." Marco's eyes softened slightly as he looked at Luca again, and Elena saw hunger there, a desperate need that made her heart clench. "My mother would love to meet him. She'll watch him while we talk." The mention of Donna Valentino sent another wave of guilt through Elena. She had loved Marco's mother, had been loved in return, and walking away had meant abandoning that relationship too. Donna had never been anything but kind to her, welcoming her into the family with genuine warmth despite Elena's very different background. The thought of facing her now, of explaining why she had vanished without a word, made Elena want to disappear into the ground. "Marco, please." She wasn't sure what she was asking for: mercy, understanding, time, forgiveness. All of it, none of it. Everything had suddenly become so complicated when 10 minutes ago her life had been simple and safe and exactly what she wanted. Marco stepped closer and she caught the scent of him, the expensive cologne that mixed with something uniquely him, a scent that was woven into some of her happiest memories and her worst nightmares. He didn't touch her, but she felt the heat of his body, the gravitational pull that had always existed between them, as undeniable as physics. "You took 4 years from me, Elena?" His voice was low, meant only for her ears, and it shook with suppressed emotion. 4 years of my son's life. I didn't see him born. I didn't hold him as a baby. I didn't teach him to walk or hear his first words. You stole all of that from me and I want to know why. Tonight. 8 o'clock. Don't make me come find you." The last sentence carried an edge of threat, and Elena knew he meant it. If she didn't show up, Marco would track her down. He had resources she couldn't begin to match, connections throughout the city, people who owed him favors. He could find her apartment in an hour if he wanted to, could discover where she worked, where Luca went to preschool, every detail of the life she had so carefully constructed. The only reason he hadn't done so already was because he hadn't known she was still in the city, hadn't been looking for her. That protection was gone now. "I'll be there," she whispered, defeated. "We'll be there." Marco nodded once, then did something that surprised her. He crouched down to Luca's level, bringing his face even with the boys. "Luca, it was very nice to meet you. You're a brave boy, very strong. I hope I'll see you again soon." Luca, ever friendly, smiled widely. "Are you Mama's friend?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Marco's eyes met Elena's over Luca's head, and she saw pain there, mixed with something harder. "I used to be," he said carefully, "a very good friend. Maybe I will be again." He stood, gave Elena one last long look that promised their conversation was far from over, and then walked away through the market with the confident stride of a man who owned the world. Elena watched him go, her heart hammering against her ribs, Luca's hands still clutched in hers like an anchor to the present. "Mama, are you okay?" Luca's concerned voice pulled her attention down to his upturned face. "You look sad." Elena forced a smile, smoothing his hair back from his forehead with a trembling hand. "I'm fine, baby. Just surprised to see an old friend. Come on, let's get those peppers and go home." They finished their shopping in a daze, Elena's mind racing as she tried to figure out what she was going to say, how she was going to explain what Marco might do. He had every right to be angry. She had denied him his child, had made a unilateral decision that affected all three of them, had run away instead of trusting him enough to try to work something out. She had told herself it was for Luca's protection, for his safety, but now, seeing the hurt in Marco's eyes, she wondered if she had also been protecting herself. Protecting her heart from the inevitable pain of loving someone whose life was so dangerous, so outside the bounds of the normal world she craved. The hours until 8 o'clock crawled by with agonizing slowness. Elena tried to maintain normalcy for Luca's sake, making lunch, reading stories, playing games, but her mind was elsewhere, cycling through scenarios and possible conversations, none of which ended well. She called her best friend Sophia, but the call went to voicemail. She considered packing and running again, but she knew it was pointless. Marco knew about Luca now, and he would never stop looking for them. The only way through this was forward, into the confrontation she had been avoiding for 5 years. She dressed carefully that evening in jeans and a simple blue sweater, refusing to put on anything that might seem like she was trying to impress him. She packed a bag for Luca with snacks, his favorite toys, and his tablet loaded with educational games, trying to prepare for the possibility that their conversation might take a while. Luca was excited about the adventure, as she had described it, not understanding the tension that made his mother's hands shake as she tied his shoes. The drive across the city to Morrison Street felt like traveling through time. Every block brought back memories: the coffee shop where she and Marco had spent Sunday mornings reading the paper, the park where he had proposed on a spring evening with fireflies dancing in the air, the bridge where they used to walk at sunset when she needed to clear her head. 5 years hadn't erased the geography of their relationship, and she found herself blinking back tears more than once as familiar landmarks triggered forgotten moments of happiness. Marco's restaurant, Valentino's, occupied a historic building that had once been a warehouse. He had renovated it into an upscale Italian restaurant that drew crowds from across the city, with exposed brick walls, warm lighting, and an open kitchen where diners could watch the chefs at work. It was one of his legitimate businesses, the public face of an empire that extended into shadows she had never wanted to fully explore. She had worked there as a waitress when they met, and he had courted her with the single-minded determination of a man who knew what he wanted and wouldn't stop until he got it. She parked in the private lot behind the building, her old access code surprisingly still working on the gate. That small detail made her throat tight. Had Marco never changed it, or had he changed it back when he saw her this morning, anticipating that she would come here? The restaurant was closed on Saturdays for private events, but she could see lights on the upper floors where Marco maintained his office and a private apartment. Luca held her hand as they approached the back entrance, chattering about a cartoon he'd watched that afternoon, blissfully unaware of the magnitude of what was about to happen. Elena's finger trembled as she pressed the buzzer, and she had to resist the urge to turn and run, to scoop Luca up and drive until they reached a border, a coast, anywhere far away from the past that was about to collide with her present. The door opened, but it wasn't Marco standing there. Vincent Valentino, Marco's younger brother, regarded her with an expression that was carefully neutral, though she could see the curiosity burning in his eyes. Vincent had always been the more outwardly friendly of the two brothers, quicker to smile, more overtly charming, but she knew better than to mistake his easy manner for softness. He was Marco's second-in-command, his most trusted advisor, and absolutely lethal when circumstances required it. "Elena." Vincent's voice was warm, but she heard the questions underneath. "It's been a long time. Marco's waiting upstairs. And this must be Luca." Vincent crouched down just as Marco had done at the market and offered Luca his hand. "Hey there, buddy. I'm Vincent. I'm your dad's brother, which makes me your Uncle Vincent. How about that?" Elena's heart stopped. The casual way he said "your dad" made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Luca looked up at her with wide eyes, confusion written across his small face. He didn't know the word dad, except from stories and other children's conversations. She had told him that his father was away, working somewhere far away, unable to be with them but loving them very much. The vague explanation had satisfied him when he was younger, but lately he had been asking more questions, questions she had deflected with increasing difficulty. "Mama?" Luca's voice was uncertain, looking for guidance. Elena knelt down beside him, her heart breaking as she prepared to shatter his world and rebuild it in the space of a single conversation. "Baby, do you remember how I told you that your daddy loves you very much but couldn't be with us? Well, something wonderful and complicated happened today. The man we met at the market, that was your daddy. And he wants very much to meet you properly, to talk to you, to get to know you. Is that okay? Luca's eyes went wide and she watched a dozen emotions play across his young face. Surprise, confusion, excitement, uncertainty. The nice man who caught me? That's my daddy? Yes, sweetheart. Elena smoothed his hair back, fighting tears. And I know this is all very sudden and strange, but he's a good man and he's going to love you so much. Uncle Vincent is going to take you to meet your grandmother while Daddy and I talk about some grown-up things, okay? And then after, we'll all spend some time together. Vincent stood, his expression softening. Come on, Luca. Nah, that's what you can call your grandmother. She's been cooking all afternoon. She makes the best cookies you've ever tasted, I promise. Luca hesitated, then looked back at Elena. Will you come get me soon, Mama? Very soon, baby. I promise. She kissed his forehead, holding him close for just a moment longer than necessary, trying to imprint the feeling of his solid warmth against her, the little boy who was her entire world and who was about to become part of something bigger and more complicated than she had ever wanted for him. Vincent offered Luca his hand, and after another moment of hesitation, Luca took it. Elena watched them walk down the hallway toward the private elevator that led to the apartment where Donna lived on the building's top floor. Then she was alone in the dimly lit corridor, facing the stairwell that led up to Marco's office, where the man she had loved and left was waiting for answers she wasn't sure she could give. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling like she was ascending to her own judgment. The door to Marco's office was open, light spilling out into the hallway, and she paused just outside, gathering her courage. She could hear nothing from inside, no movement, no sound, just the heavy silence of waiting. Elena took a deep breath and stepped through the doorway, and her eyes immediately found Marco standing by the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him as he stared out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. The office was exactly as she remembered it. Heavy wooden desk, leather chairs, bookshelves lined with volumes on business and Italian history, a small bar cart in the corner, and the leather couch where she had spent countless hours reading while he worked. The only new addition was a series of photographs on the wall, images of Marco with various business associates and family members, a chronicle of the years she had missed. Marco turned when he heard her enter, and the look on his face nearly broke her. He had dropped the careful composure he had maintained at the market. Now she saw raw pain, betrayal, anger, and underneath it all, the love that had never died despite 5 years and 1,000 miles of distance. He looked at her as if he was seeing a ghost, something precious that he thought he'd lost forever suddenly standing in front of him, real and solid and devastating. Close the door, he said quietly, and she did, the click of the latch sounding like a prison cell closing or a safe opening, she wasn't sure which. They stood there for a long moment, just looking at each other across the expanse of the office. Elena tried to find words, any words, to begin the explanation he deserved, but everything she thought of sounded inadequate, insufficient to bridge the chasm of hurt and lost time between them. He's mine. Marco's voice was rough, barely controlled. That boy, Luca, he's my son. It wasn't a question, but Elena answered anyway. Yes. You were pregnant when you left. Yes. And you never told me. The words came out like broken glass, sharp and cutting. You never gave me a chance. You just decided, unilaterally without my input, that I wasn't fit to be a father. That I didn't deserve to know. That you would rather raise him alone than let me be part of his life. Marco. 5 years, Elena. He exploded suddenly, his control snapping like a wire pulled too tight. 5 goddamn years. Do you have any idea what it did to me when you left? I tore this city apart looking for you. I called in every favor I had, used every resource at my disposal. I thought you were dead. I thought someone had taken you, hurt you, killed you to get to me. I lived with that guilt, that fear, every single day. And you were here. You were here the whole time raising my son, and you couldn't even pick up a fucking phone. His voice had risen to a roar, and Elena flinched, tears streaming down her face. She had known he would be angry, but hearing it, seeing it, feeling the full force of his pain directed at her was worse than anything she had imagined. I couldn't. The words burst from her, her own anger and fear and regret finally finding voice. I couldn't stay in that world, Marco. I couldn't raise a baby surrounded by danger and violence and men with guns. I couldn't watch my child grow up thinking that was normal, that it was okay. I was terrified every single day we were together. Every time your phone rang in the middle of the night, every time you came home late with blood on your shirt that you swore wasn't yours, every time I read about some murder or robbery in the paper and wondered if you were involved, I lived in constant fear and I couldn't do that to our baby. So you did it to me instead. Marco's voice had gone quiet again, but it was worse than the shouting, cold and hard as stone. You condemned me to a life without my child. You made that choice for all of us without giving me any say. Did you think so little of me? Did you really believe I wouldn't have changed, wouldn't have tried to build something better for our family? I don't know. Elena was sobbing now, years of suppressed guilt and fear pouring out. I don't know what you would have done because I was too scared to ask. I was 24 years old, pregnant, terrified, and I knew that if I tried to talk to you about it, you would convince me to stay. You always could convince me of anything, Marco. You had this power over me, and I knew that if I looked into your eyes and told you I was leaving, I would never actually go. So I left in the night like a coward, and I've hated myself for it every single day since. Marco stared at her, his chest heaving with emotion, and she saw the exact moment when some of his anger cracked, letting something else show through: hurt, loss, the grief of a man who had missed the first 4 years of his son's life. He moved to the desk and leaned against it, suddenly looking exhausted, all the fight draining out of him. Tell me about him, he said finally, his voice hoarse. Tell me everything. His first word, his first step, what he likes and doesn't like, what scares him, what makes him laugh. Tell me about my son, Elena. Give me that much at least. So she did. For the next 2 hours, Elena told Marco everything about Luca. How he had been born on a spring morning in a small hospital upstate, how she had held him and cried because he had Marco's eyes, how he had been a fussy baby who only calmed when she sang Italian lullabies that she'd learned from Donna. She told him about Luca's first word, which had been mama, and his first steps, which he'd taken while chasing a butterfly in their tiny garden. She described his love of dinosaurs and trucks, his fear of thunder, his habit of singing himself to sleep. She shared every milestone, every memory, every moment of joy and frustration and love that had filled the past 4 years. Marco listened with an intensity that was almost painful to witness, drinking in every detail, his hands clenched on the edge of the desk as if he were physically holding himself together. Occasionally he would ask a question. Did Luca have any health problems? Did he sleep through the night? Did he ask about his father? And Elena answered everything honestly, holding nothing back. This was her penance, her payment for the years she had stolen. If Marco wanted to know everything, she would tell him everything. When she finally fell silent, her voice hoarse from talking, Marco remained quiet for a long time. The office had grown dark around them, lit only by the desk lamp and the city lights through the window. Elena waited, exhausted and emptied out, for whatever would come next. I want to be part of his life, Marco said finally, his voice steady now, controlled. Not as some stranger who visits occasionally. I want to be his father in every sense of the word. I want custody, Elena. Shared custody at minimum, joint if possible. I want him to know my family, to grow up understanding where he comes from. I want to make up for the time I've lost. Fear spiked through Elena's exhaustion. Marco, please. I could take you to court, he continued as if she hadn't spoken. I have resources you can't match. I could prove you kidnapped him, kept him from me intentionally. I could make your life very difficult, Elena. You wouldn't. But even as she said it, she wasn't sure. This Marco was harder than the man she had left, colder, marked by 5 years she hadn't been there to witness. No, he admitted, surprising her. I wouldn't. Because despite everything, despite the hurt and the anger and the betrayal, I still know you. I know you love our son more than anything. I know you're a good mother. And I know that tearing him away from you would hurt him, and I will never do anything to hurt my son. Never. The emphasis on the last word was clear. You would never hurt Luca. But her? That was a different story. So here's what's going to happen, Marco continued, his tone businesslike now, the emotion locked away behind the facade of the man who ran an empire. You and Luca are going to move into the apartment building I own on Park Street. It's secure, well-maintained, and close enough that I can see him regularly. I'll cover your rent and expenses. You can keep working if you want, but Luca will have everything he needs regardless. I will see him a minimum of 3 times a week, more if possible. We will co-parent like adults, and we will put his needs first in every decision. And you, he paused, his eyes boring into hers. You will never, ever keep him from me again. If you try to run, I will find you. If you try to hide him from me, I will use every resource at my disposal to get him back. Am I making myself clear? It wasn't a negotiation. It was an ultimatum, delivered with the quiet authority of a man who was used to being obeyed. Elena should have been angry, should have fought back against his high-handed demands, but she was too tired and too aware that she had no moral high ground to stand on. She had created this situation. Now she would have to live with the consequences. And what if I say no? She asked, not because she was going to refuse, but because she needed to know where the boundaries were, how much power she had left. Marco's expression darkened. Then I'll do what I have to do to protect my rights as a father. I don't want to fight you, Elena. I want us to work together for Luca's sake. But make no mistake, I will fight if I have to and I will win. I always do. It was true. Marco Valentino always won. That was how he had survived and thrived in a world that chewed up and spit out weaker men. That was how he had built his empire, how he had protected his family, how he had earned the respect and fear of people throughout the city. Elena had no illusions about her ability to go up against him in a custody battle. He would bury her in legal fees, produce character witnesses and evidence of her instability, use his connections to tip every scale in his favor. She might love Luca with her whole heart, but Marco had weapons she couldn't match. Okay, she whispered, defeated. Okay. We'll move to your building. We'll do this your way. But Marco, she met his eyes, needing him to understand. He's a little boy. He doesn't understand any of this. We have to be careful with him, gentle. We can't just upend his entire world overnight. Something in Marco's face softened, just a fraction. I know. I'm not a monster, Elena, no matter what you might think. I want what's best for him. Always. A soft knock at the door interrupted them, and Vincent poked his head in. Sorry to interrupt, but Luca's getting tired. Mom's put him down on the couch with a blanket, and he's asking for his mama. Elena stood immediately, relief flooding through her at the excuse to escape this room, this conversation, the weight of Marco's gaze and the consequences of her choices. But Marco stood too, and his hand caught her arm, not hard but firm, stopping her before she could leave. One more thing, he said, and his voice had changed, become lower, more intimate. I need you to know, I'm still angry. I'm hurt. I feel betrayed in ways I'm not sure I can even express. But Elena, underneath all of that, he paused, and when he spoke again his voice was raw. I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day. And seeing you again, knowing that we have a son together, it doesn't change what you did, but it changes everything else. So we're going to figure this out together, because that little boy deserves both of his parents. And maybe, if we're very lucky and very careful, we'll figure out what we still mean to each other in the process. He released her arm, and Elena fled the room before she could do something foolish like cry or worse, reach for him the way every cell in her body was screaming at her to do. She found Luca in Donna's apartment, curled up on a plush couch under a soft blanket, fighting sleep with the determination of a child who doesn't want to miss anything interesting. Donna sat beside him, one weathered hand gently stroking his hair, and when she looked up at Elena, there were tears streaming down her face. Elena, Donna whispered, standing carefully so as not to disturb Luca. She crossed the room and pulled Elena into a fierce embrace, and Elena broke, sobbing into the older woman's shoulder as 5 years of guilt and loneliness poured out. Donna held her tightly, making soothing sounds in Italian, and for just a moment, Elena let herself be comforted, let herself accept the forgiveness she didn't deserve. When they finally pulled apart, Donna cupped Elena's face in her hands. You took my grandson from me, she said, and there was hurt in her voice but also understanding. But you also kept him safe, raised him well, loved him with your whole heart. I see that. Marco sees it too, even if he's too angry right now to say it. We will work this out, Cara. For that beautiful boy, we will find a way forward. Elena nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She gathered Luca, who was now half asleep, into her arms and made her way to the elevator. Marco appeared just as the doors were opening, and without a word, he rode down with them, his presence filling the small space. In the parking lot, he walked them to her car, and before Elena could open the door, he reached out and touched Luca's sleeping face with one gentle finger, the gesture so tender that Elena's heart cracked. Good night, my son, Marco whispered. Then to Elena in a harder voice, I'll have the apartment ready by Tuesday. Vincent will bring the lease by your place tomorrow for you to sign. Don't make this difficult, Elena. She didn't. On Tuesday morning, she and Luca moved into a spacious 2-bedroom apartment with hardwood floors, modern appliances, and security that would have impressed a paranoid dictator. On Wednesday evening, Marco came for his first official visit, bringing toys and books and a nervousness that was endearing in a man who usually exuded confidence. On Thursday, Luca asked if Daddy could read him his bedtime story, and Elena watched through the crack in the door as Marco sat on the edge of Luca's new bed, stumbling over the words to "Where the Wild Things Are," with an expression of such complete joy that she had to turn away before she started crying again. And so their new life began, built on the ruins of the old one, fragile and complicated and nothing like what Elena had planned, but perhaps, just perhaps, exactly what all of them needed. The encounter that had shattered her carefully constructed world had also opened a door she thought was closed forever. Where it led she didn't know. But for Luca's sake, for all their sakes, she was finally ready to find out. The autumn air carried the scent of dying leaves and approaching rain as Elena stood at her apartment window, watching Marco's black Mercedes pull into the parking lot below. It had been 6 weeks since that day at the farmer's market, 6 weeks of tentative co-parenting, careful conversations, and the slow, painful reconstruction of something that resembled a family. Luca had adapted to the new arrangement with the flexibility of childhood, accepting Marco's presence in his life as if his father had always been there, just temporarily away on a very long business trip. For Elena, the adjustment had been infinitely more complicated. Every time Marco walked through the door, every time she heard his voice or caught his scent or accidentally touched his hand while passing Luca between them, she was reminded of everything she had lost, everything she had thrown away, everything she had convinced herself she didn't want anymore but clearly still did with an intensity that terrified her. She had built her life around the principle that she was better off without Marco Valentino, that love wasn't enough to bridge the gap between their worlds, that safety mattered more than passion. But watching him with their son, patient, gentle, devoted, was systematically dismantling every justification she had constructed for leaving him. Today was different from the usual evening visits. Today Marco was taking Luca to meet more of the extended Valentino family at his mother's estate in the countryside. It would be the first time Luca spent significant time away from Elena, the first real test of the shared custody arrangement, and she was struggling not to let her anxiety show. She had packed his bag 3 times, checking and rechecking that she hadn't forgotten his allergy medicine, his favorite stuffed dinosaur, the special blanket he needed to fall asleep. The knock at the door came precisely at 9, because Marco was always precisely on time, a man whose life ran on schedules and routines that couldn't be disrupted. Elena opened it to find him standing in the hallway in dark jeans and a navy sweater, looking unfairly handsome and holding a coffee cup from her favorite cafe. The 112 blocks away that she'd mentioned exactly once was the only place in the city that made a decent cappuccino. "Peace offering," he said, extending the cup. "Vincent told me you've been stressed about today. Thought you might need this." Elena took the coffee, ridiculously touched by the gesture even though she knew she shouldn't be. This was exactly what Marco had always done, small thoughtful acts that made her feel seen, understood, cherished. It was one of the things that had made leaving him so impossibly hard. "Thank you," she said, stepping back to let him in. "Luca's just finishing his breakfast. He's very excited about meeting everyone." Marco's face lit up in the way it always did when she mentioned their son, a transformation that never failed to affect her. In the weeks since they had reconnected, she had watched him discover fatherhood with an intensity that was pure Marco, researching child development, reading parenting books, consulting with pediatricians about nutrition and sleep schedules. He approached being a father the same way he approached everything in his life, with meticulous attention to detail and a determination to excel. "Elena," Marco said, and something in his tone made her look up from the coffee. "We need to talk. About the situation." Her stomach tightened. "What situation?" "Vincent's been monitoring chatter in the organization. Word has gotten out that I have a son. People are talking, speculating, and not all of it is innocent curiosity. Anthony Romano has been asking questions." Anthony Romano. Even the name sent a chill down Elena's spine. She had never met the man, but she knew who he was. One of Marco's rivals, ambitious and ruthless, the kind of man who would exploit any perceived weakness. And Luca was a weakness, a vulnerability, a target. "No." The word came out flat, panicked. "No, Marco, you said we would be safe. You promised that if I stayed, if I let you be part of his life, you would protect us. And I will." Marco stepped closer, his hands raised in a calming gesture, but Elena backed away, the coffee sloshing dangerously in her cup. This was exactly what she had feared, what she had run away from 5 years ago. The danger, the threats, the impossible choice between love and safety. "I told you this would happen." Her voice rose despite her efforts to keep it down, not wanting Luca to hear. "I told you that your world was too dangerous for a child. This is why I left, Marco. This is why I couldn't stay. Elena, listen to me." Marco's voice was firm but not angry, the tone of someone trying to talk a frightened animal away from a ledge. "The situation is under control. I've already taken precautions. There's security watching this building 24 hours a day. I've had backgrounds run on everyone who works at Luca's preschool. Vincent is coordinating with our associates to make sure Romano understands that my family is completely off limits. You're both safe, I promise you." "You can't promise that." The coffee cup was shaking in her hand now, and Marco gently took it from her, setting it on the entry table before she could spill it. You can't promise safety in a world where people solve problems with violence. What happens when Romano decides that taking Luca is worth the consequences? What happens when someone sees an opportunity to hurt you through our son? I won't. Elena. Marco caught her hands, holding them firmly, grounding her. Look at me. Look at me. She did, meeting those dark eyes that had haunted her dreams for 5 years, and saw not dismissal or irritation but understanding mixed with determination. I know you're scared, he said quietly. I know you think I don't take it seriously, that I don't understand what's at stake. But you're wrong. That boy in there? He jerked his head toward the kitchen where Luca was singing to himself. He's the most important thing in my life. More important than the business, than my reputation, than my own life. I would burn everything I've built to the ground before I would let anything happen to him. Or to you. The last 3 words hung in the air between them, weighted with implications Elena wasn't ready to examine. She tried to pull her hands away, but Marco held firm, his thumbs rubbing gentle circles on her wrists in a gesture that was achingly familiar. I've made arrangements, Marco continued. You and Luke are going to come to the estate today, yes, but you're going to stay there. At least for a while, until we're certain Romano isn't planning anything stupid. The estate has security that would make a military base jealous. There are guards, cameras, safe rooms, the works. My mother will be there, Vincent, several other family members. You won't be alone, and you'll be as safe as it's possible to be. You're asking me to move into your family home? Elena's voice was faint. To just upend our lives because of a threat that might not even be real? The threat is real. Marco's expression darkened. I've been doing this long enough to know when someone is testing boundaries, looking for openings. Romano is ambitious and stupid, a dangerous combination. He's been making moves, trying to expand into territories that aren't his, stepping on toes. He wants to prove he's a major player, and taking something from me would establish that. I won't give him the opportunity. I'm sorry, Elena whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Marco. I know that doesn't fix anything, doesn't change what I did, but I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. Leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done, and there were 1,000 times I almost came back, almost called, almost tried to find you. But I was afraid that if I did, you would convince me to stay and I would end up resenting you for it, resenting Luca for it, and that seemed worse than the pain of staying away. Marco set down his wine glass and crossed to the couch, sitting beside her but not touching, the space between them charged with possibility and danger. Can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone? Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. When you left, I wanted to die. The words were stark, brutal in their honesty. Not metaphorically, literally. I stood on the balcony of our apartment at 3 a.m. and thought about how easy it would be to just step over the edge to end the pain. The only thing that stopped me was Vincent. He found me there, talked me down, stayed with me for weeks afterward to make sure I didn't try again. And even after I got past that darkest moment, there were years where I was just going through the motions, functioning but not really living. The business grew, I made money, I maintained my reputation, but inside I was hollow. Elena turned to him, horrified and heartbroken. Marco, I didn't mean. I know. He finally reached out, his hand cupping her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. I know you didn't leave to hurt me. I know you thought you were doing what was best for our child. And maybe you were right. Maybe I wouldn't have changed, wouldn't have tried to build something better if you had stayed and I had known about Luca from the beginning. Maybe I needed to lose everything to understand what really mattered. His thumb brushed away her tears, and Elena found herself leaning into his touch, starved for this connection, this intimacy that she had denied herself for so long. What are we doing? She whispered. What is this, Marco? I don't know, he admitted. But I know I still love you. I know that seeing you again, having you here, being with our son, it's like someone turned the lights back on in a house I thought was abandoned. And I know that if there's any chance at all, that we could find our way back to each other, I want to try. Not for Luca's sake, although he deserves parents who love each other. But for us. Because what we had was real, Elena, and it doesn't just disappear because time passes or circumstances change. Elena knew she should pull away, should maintain the boundaries she had so carefully constructed to protect herself from exactly this moment. But she was tired of being strong, tired of being afraid, tired of pretending that she didn't want exactly what Marco was offering. So instead of pulling away, she leaned in, closing the distance between them, and kissed him. It was like coming home and jumping off a cliff at the same time. His lips were exactly as she remembered, firm and soft and perfect, and his arms came around her with a sureness that made her feel safe and cherished and desired all at once. 5 years of loneliness and longing poured into that kiss, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena saw her own emotions reflected in Marco's eyes, hope and fear and love and desire all tangled together in a knot that neither of them knew how to untie. "Stay," Marco whispered against her lips. "Not just until the threat from Romano passes. Stay here with me, let's try to rebuild what we had. I'm not the same man I was 5 years ago, and you're not the same woman. Maybe these new versions of us can make it work." "I'm scared," Elena admitted. "I'm scared that I'll fall completely, that I'll let my guard down and then something will happen. Romano or someone else will make a move, and I'll lose you or you'll lose me or, God forbid, something will happen to Luca. I don't know if I'm strong enough to survive that." "Then we'll be scared together," Marco said simply. "We'll build something new, something stronger, something that can withstand the threats because we're facing them together instead of you trying to protect yourself by running away. Let me be your partner, Elena. Let me prove that I can be the man you need, the father Luca deserves, the husband who keeps his family safe without keeping them in the dark." It was a promise, a plea, and a challenge all at once. Elena knew she was standing at a crossroads, that the decision she made in this moment would define not just her own future but Luca's and Marco's as well. She could pull back, maintain her emotional distance, co-parent from a safe remove. Or she could take the terrifying leap of trusting him again, of believing that love might be enough if they were both willing to fight for it. She thought of Luca's drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. She thought of the joy on Marco's face when he read bedtime stories, the gentleness in his hands when he tucked their son into bed. She thought of 5 years of loneliness, of lying awake at night wishing she could call him, of Luca asking when he would meet his father, of building a life that was safe but incomplete. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, we'll try. But Marco, I need you to promise me something. If this doesn't work, if we try and it falls apart, we have to put Luca first. We have to promise that no matter what happens between us, we'll be good co-parents, we'll never make him feel like he has to choose or like our problems are his fault." "I promise," Marco said immediately. "Luca will always come first. Always." He pulled her close again, and this time when they kissed, it felt like a beginning instead of an ending, like the first page of a new chapter instead of the final paragraph of an old story. They sat together on the couch for a long time after that, talking quietly about everything and nothing. Their hopes for Luca, their fears about Romano, their memories of when they had first met and fallen in love. Marco told her about the changes he had been making to the business, transitioning away from the more dangerous aspects and into legitimate enterprises. Elena talked about her dream of opening her own bakery someday, of creating a business that Luca could be proud of. They didn't solve all their problems in that one evening, didn't erase 5 years of hurt and separation with a few hours of conversation. But they made a start, and sometimes that's all anyone can do. The next morning brought complications, as mornings often do. Elena woke to find Vincent standing in the doorway of the sitting room with a grim expression that immediately set her nerves on edge. Marco was already up, dressed, and clearly in the middle of a tense conversation with his brother that they had paused when they noticed she was awake. "What's happened?" Elena asked, pulling on the robe Donna had left for her and crossing to where the men stood. Marco exchanged a look with Vincent, clearly debating how much to tell her, and Elena felt a flash of the old frustration. "Don't," she warned. "Don't try to protect me by keeping me in the dark. If this affects me or Luca, I have a right to know." "Romano made a move last night," Vincent said, his voice tight. "Nothing violent, nothing direct, but he sent people to Elena's old apartment, the one above the bakery. They questioned the landlord, asked about her and Luca, wanted to know where they had gone. The landlord, Carlos Martinez, good guy, told them nothing and called my contact at the police immediately. But it confirms what we suspected. Romano's trying to locate them, which means he's planning something." Elena felt ice spread through her veins. "He knows where Luca went to preschool. He could." "I've already made arrangements," Marco interrupted. "Vincent's pulling him out of that school and enrolling him in the private academy here, the one on the estate grounds. It has security, carefully vetted staff, everything we need. And before you argue," he held up a hand as Elena opened her mouth to protest, "this is temporary. Once we deal with Romano, once the threat is neutralized, we can reassess. But right now, keeping Luca safe means keeping him close." "Deal with Romano," Elena repeated slowly. "What does that mean exactly? Are you going to—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't say the words. "I'm going to make it clear that touching my family would be the last mistake he ever makes," Marco said flatly, and the coldness in his voice reminded her forcefully of who he was, what he was capable of, the power he wielded in a world she didn't fully understand. There are ways to handle this without violence, Elena. I'm not the same man I was 5 years ago. I've learned that there are more effective tools than fear and intimidation, though I'll use those too if I have to. Let me guess, Elena said bitterly, I don't need to worry about the details. I should just trust that you'll handle it and not ask too many questions. That's not what I'm saying. Marco's voice softened and he crossed to her, taking her hands. I'm saying that I will protect our son using every resource at my disposal, but I will do it in a way that doesn't make me into someone Luca can't be proud of. Vincent and I have been working on transitioning the business into legitimate enterprises for the past 2 years. Romano represents old thinking, old ways of doing things. There are people in our organization and others who are tired of the constant conflict, who want to move into a more stable, sustainable model. We're going to use that sentiment, build a coalition and isolate Romano. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen. Elena searched his face, looking for signs of the violence she feared, but she found only determination and something that looked like wisdom hard-won through experience. How long? She asked. How long until we can go back to normal or whatever passes for normal in our lives? A few months, maybe, Vincent interjected. Romano's ambitious but not stupid. Once he understands that going after Marco's family would unite everyone against him, he'll back down. He wants power, not martyrdom. And in the meantime, we're prisoners here? Elena gestured at the beautiful room, the comfortable surroundings that suddenly felt like a very nice cage. You're safe here, Marco corrected gently. There's a difference. And you're not alone. My mother is here, Vincent, other family members. Luca will have cousins to play with, a routine, stability. You can still work if you want, we can set up a kitchen for you, you can experiment with recipes, maybe even start planning for that bakery you mentioned last night. This doesn't have to be a pause on your life, Elena. It can be a different chapter. He was right and she hated that he was right, hated that her options had narrowed to this, stay and be safe but constrained or leave and put Luca at risk. It wasn't really a choice at all. So she nodded, swallowing her resentment and fear, and tried to focus on the positives. Luca would be safe. She and Marco would have time to rebuild their relationship without the distractions and complications of their separate lives. And maybe, if they were very lucky, they could figure out how to be a family before the outside world intruded again. The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm. Mornings with Luca, teaching him letters and numbers while Marco worked in his office. Afternoons in the kitchen that Donna gleefully helped her set up, experimenting with recipes and techniques. The older woman sharing secrets passed down through generations while Elena contributed her own innovations. Evenings with Marco, after Luca was asleep, talking and laughing and slowly rebuilding the intimacy that had been shattered 5 years ago. They didn't rush into anything physical beyond kissing, both aware that they needed to rebuild trust before they could rebuild everything else. Donna was a constant, warm presence, doting on Luca but also giving Elena and Marco space when they needed it. She told stories about Marco's childhood, about his father who had died when Marco was 16, about the family's history and traditions. Elena found herself drawn into the Valentino world in a way she hadn't been during her marriage, when she had been too young and too overwhelmed to fully appreciate what she was becoming part of. Vincent was another revelation. He spent significant time at the estate during those weeks, ostensibly coordinating security but really, Elena suspected, keeping an eye on his brother and making sure Marco didn't fall back into old patterns. Vincent was charming and funny, quick with a joke to lighten tense moments, but she also saw the steel underneath, the absolute loyalty to family that made him dangerous to anyone who threatened the people he loved. 6 weeks into their stay at the estate, Marco asked Elena to marry him. Not with a ring or a grand gesture, but in the quiet of the garden after dinner, while they walked among Donna's roses and the sun set in shades of gold and crimson. I know it's fast, he said, taking her hand. I know we're still figuring things out. But Elena, I don't want to waste any more time. I want to be your husband again, officially, legally. I want Luca to grow up seeing his parents together, married, committed. I want to build a future with you, not as co-parents or ex-spouses trying to make things work, but as partners in everything. Will you marry me? Elena should have said no. Should have insisted they needed more time, more stability, more certainty that they could actually make it work this time. But she looked at this man who had grown and changed, who was trying so hard to be better, to be the person she and Luca needed, and she couldn't find it in herself to be cautious. Romano made a move last night, Vincent said, his voice tight. Nothing violent, nothing direct, but he sent people to Elena's old apartment, the one above the bakery. They questioned the landlord, asked about her and Luca, wanted to know where they had gone. The landlord, Carlos Martinez, good guy, told them nothing and called my contact at the police immediately. But it confirms what we suspected. Romano's trying to locate them, which means he's planning something. Elena felt ice spread through her veins. He knows where Luca went to preschool. He could. I've already made arrangements, Marco interrupted. Vincent's pulling him out of that school and enrolling him in the private academy here, the one on the estate grounds. It has security, carefully vetted staff, everything we need. And before you argue, he held up a hand as Elena opened her mouth to protest. This is temporary. Once we deal with Romano, once the threat is neutralized, we can reassess. But right now, keeping Luca safe means keeping him close. Deal with Romano, Elena repeated slowly. What does that mean exactly? Are you going to? She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't say the words. I'm going to make it clear that touching my family would be the last mistake he ever makes, Marco said flatly, and the coldness in his voice reminded her forcefully of who he was, what he was capable of, the power he wielded in a world she didn't fully understand. There are ways to handle this without violence, Elena. I'm not the same man I was 5 years ago. I've learned that there are more effective tools than fear and intimidation, though I'll use those too if I have to. Let me guess, Elena said bitterly. I don't need to worry about the details. I should just trust that you'll handle it and not ask too many questions. That's not what I'm saying. Marco's voice softened and he crossed to her, taking her hands. I'm saying that I will protect our son using every resource at my disposal, but I will do it in a way that doesn't make me into someone Luca can't be proud of. Vincent and I have been working on transitioning the business into legitimate enterprises for the past 2 years. Romano represents old thinking, old ways of doing things. There are people in our organization and others who are tired of the constant conflict, who want to move into a more stable, sustainable model. We're going to use that sentiment, build a coalition and isolate Romano. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen. Elena searched his face, looking for signs of the violence she feared, but she found only determination and something that looked like wisdom hard-won through experience. How long? She asked. How long until we can go back to normal or whatever passes for normal in our lives? A few months, maybe, Vincent interjected. Romano's ambitious but not stupid. Once he understands that going after Marco's family would unite everyone against him, he'll back down. He wants power, not martyrdom. And in the meantime, we're prisoners here? Elena gestured at the beautiful room, the comfortable surroundings that suddenly felt like a very nice cage. You're safe here, Marco corrected gently. There's a difference. And you're not alone. My mother is here, Vincent, other family members. Luca will have cousins to play with, a routine, stability. You can still work if you want, we can set up a kitchen for you, you can experiment with recipes, maybe even start planning for that bakery you mentioned last night. This doesn't have to be a pause on your life, Elena. It can be a different chapter. He was right and she hated that he was right, hated that her options had narrowed to this, stay and be safe but constrained or leave and put Luca at risk. It wasn't really a choice at all. So she nodded, swallowing her resentment and fear, and tried to focus on the positives. Luca would be safe. She and Marco would have time to rebuild their relationship without the distractions and complications of their separate lives. And maybe, if they were very lucky, they could figure out how to be a family before the outside world intruded again. The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm. Mornings with Luca, teaching him letters and numbers while Marco worked in his office. Afternoons in the kitchen that Donna gleefully helped her set up, experimenting with recipes and techniques, the older woman sharing secrets passed down through generations while Elena contributed her own innovations. Evenings with Marco, after Luca was asleep, talking and laughing and slowly rebuilding the intimacy that had been shattered 5 years ago. They didn't rush into anything physical beyond kissing, both aware that they needed to rebuild trust before they could rebuild everything else. Donna was a constant, warm presence, doting on Luca but also giving Elena and Marco space when they needed it. She told stories about Marco's childhood, about his father who had died when Marco was 16, about the family's history and traditions. Elena found herself drawn into the Valentino world in a way she hadn't been during her marriage, when she had been too young and too overwhelmed to fully appreciate what she was becoming part of. Vincent was another revelation. He spent significant time at the estate during those weeks, ostensibly coordinating security but really, Elena suspected, keeping an eye on his brother and making sure Marco didn't fall back into old patterns. Vincent was charming and funny, quick with a joke to lighten tense moments, but she also saw the steel underneath, the absolute loyalty to family that made him dangerous to anyone who threatened the people he loved. 6 weeks into their stay at the estate, Marco asked Elena to marry him. Not with a ring or a grand gesture, but in the quiet of the garden after dinner, while they walked among Donna's roses and the sun set in shades of gold and crimson. "I know it's fast," he said, taking her hand. "I know we're still figuring things out. But Elena, I don't want to waste any more time. I want to be your husband again, officially, legally. I want Luca to grow up seeing his parents together, married, committed. I want to build a future with you, not as co-parents or ex-spouses trying to make things work, but as partners in everything. Will you marry me?" Elena should have said no. Should have insisted they needed more time, more stability, more certainty that they could actually make it work this time. But she looked at this man who had grown and changed, who was trying so hard to be better, to be the person she and Luca needed, and she couldn't find it in herself to be cautious. "Romano made a move last night," Vincent said, his voice tight. "Nothing violent, nothing direct, but he sent people to Elena's old apartment, the one above the bakery. They questioned the landlord, asked about her and Luca, wanted to know where they had gone. The landlord, Carlos Martinez, good guy, told them nothing and called my contact at the police immediately. But it confirms what we suspected. Romano's trying to locate them, which means he's planning something." Elena felt ice spread through her veins. "He knows where Luca went to preschool. He could." "I've already made arrangements," Marco interrupted. "Vincent's pulling him out of that school and enrolling him in the private academy here, the one on the estate grounds. It has security, carefully vetted staff, everything we need. And before you argue," he held up a hand as Elena opened her mouth to protest, "this is temporary. Once we deal with Romano, once the threat is neutralized, we can reassess. But right now, keeping Luca safe means keeping him close." "Deal with Romano," Elena repeated slowly. "What does that mean exactly? Are you going to—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't say the words. "I'm going to make it clear that touching my family would be the last mistake he ever makes," Marco said flatly, and the coldness in his voice reminded her forcefully of who he was, what he was capable of, the power he wielded in a world she didn't fully understand. "There are ways to handle this without violence, Elena. I'm not the same man I was 5 years ago. I've learned that there are more effective tools than fear and intimidation, though I'll use those too if I have to." "Let me guess," Elena said bitterly. "I don't need to worry about the details. I should just trust that you'll handle it and not ask too many questions." "That's not what I'm saying." Marco's voice softened and he crossed to her, taking her hands. "I'm saying that I will protect our son using every resource at my disposal, but I will do it in a way that doesn't make me into someone Luca can't be proud of. Vincent and I have been working on transitioning the business into legitimate enterprises for the past 2 years. Romano represents old thinking, old ways of doing things. There are people in our organization and others who are tired of the constant conflict, who want to move into a more stable, sustainable model. We're going to use that sentiment, build a coalition and isolate Romano. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen." Elena searched his face, looking for signs of the violence she feared, but she found only determination and something that looked like wisdom hard-won through experience. "How long?" she asked. "How long until we can go back to normal or whatever passes for normal in our lives?" "A few months, maybe," Vincent interjected. "Romano's ambitious but not stupid. Once he understands that going after Marco's family would unite everyone against him, he'll back down. He wants power, not martyrdom. And in the meantime we're prisoners here?" Elena gestured at the beautiful room, the comfortable surroundings that suddenly felt like a very nice cage. "You're safe here," Marco corrected gently. "There's a difference. And you're not alone. My mother is here, Vincent, other family members. Luca will have cousins to play with, a routine, stability. You can still work if you want, we can set up a kitchen for you, you can experiment with recipes, maybe even start planning for that bakery you mentioned last night. This doesn't have to be a pause on your life, Elena. It can be a different chapter." He was right and she hated that he was right, hated that her options had narrowed to this, stay and be safe but constrained or leave and put Luca at risk. It wasn't really a choice at all. So she nodded, swallowing her resentment and fear, and tried to focus on the positives. Luca would be safe. She and Marco would have time to rebuild their relationship without the distractions and complications of their separate lives. And maybe, if they were very lucky, they could figure out how to be a family before the outside world intruded again. The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm. Mornings with Luca, teaching him letters and numbers while Marco worked in his office. Afternoons in the kitchen that Donna gleefully helped her set up, experimenting with recipes and techniques, the older woman sharing secrets passed down through generations while Elena contributed her own innovations. Evenings with Marco, after Luca was asleep, talking and laughing and slowly rebuilding the intimacy that had been shattered 5 years ago. They didn't rush into anything physical beyond kissing, both aware that they needed to rebuild trust before they could rebuild everything else. Donna was a constant, warm presence, doting on Luca but also giving Elena and Marco space when they needed it. She told stories about Marco's childhood, about his father who had died when Marco was 16, about the family's history and traditions. Elena found herself drawn into the Valentino world in a way she hadn't been during her marriage, when she had been too young and too overwhelmed to fully appreciate what she was becoming part of. Vincent was another revelation. He spent significant time at the estate during those weeks, ostensibly coordinating security but really, Elena suspected, keeping an eye on his brother and making sure Marco didn't fall back into old patterns. Vincent was charming and funny, quick with a joke to lighten tense moments, but she also saw the steel underneath, the absolute loyalty to family that made him dangerous to anyone who threatened the people he loved. 6 weeks into their stay at the estate, Marco asked Elena to marry him. Not with a ring or a grand gesture, but in the quiet of the garden after dinner, while they walked among Donna's roses and the sun set in shades of gold and crimson. "I know it's fast," he said, taking her hand. "I know we're still figuring things out. But Elena, I don't want to waste any more time. I want to be your husband again, officially, legally. I want Luca to grow up seeing his parents together, married, committed. I want to build a future with you, not as co-parents or ex-spouses trying to make things work, but as partners in everything. Will you marry me?" Elena should have said no. Should have insisted they needed more time, more stability, more certainty that they could actually make it work this time. But she looked at this man who had grown and changed, who was trying so hard to be better, to be the person she and Luca needed, and she couldn't find it in herself to be cautious. The night Elena went into labor was chaos wrapped in joy, wrapped in terror. Her water broke at 2 in the morning, and Marco went from peacefully sleeping to fully alert in seconds, years of training for emergencies serving him well. He called the doctor, woke Donna to watch Luca, and had Elena in the car heading to the hospital within 10 minutes, all while maintaining a calm exterior that Elena saw right through. His hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and he kept glancing at her with barely concealed panic. "I'm fine," she assured him between contractions. "Women have been doing this for thousands of years. We're designed for it." "You weren't designed to be in pain," Marco said tightly, and she reached over to squeeze his hand, touched by his concern even as another contraction made her gasp. The labor was long but not complicated, and when their second son entered the world at 4:37 that afternoon, crying lustily and waving tiny fists, Elena watched Marco cry for the second time in their relationship, the first being their wedding day. He held their newborn son with shaking hands, staring at the tiny face with an expression of such complete wonder that Elena fell in love with him all over again. They named him Marco Jr., though everyone immediately started calling him MJ to distinguish him from his father. He had Elena's lighter coloring but Marco's features, and when Luca met his baby brother for the first time, his face lit up with such pure joy that Elena had to blink back tears. "He's so small," Luca whispered, carefully touching MJ's tiny hand. "Don't worry, baby brother. I'll protect you and teach you everything I know." Marco met Elena's eyes over their sons' heads, and she saw her own emotions reflected there: gratitude, love, the sense that they had been given something precious and rare, a second chance that most people never got. They had walked through fire to get here, had hurt each other and healed, had broken apart and come back together stronger. And now they had this: 2 beautiful sons, a life built on honesty and love, a future that stretched ahead of them full of possibility. The first months with a newborn tested them in ways Elena had forgotten were possible. MJ was a fussy baby, colicky and demanding, and there were nights when she and Marco took turns pacing the floor, trying every trick to soothe him. But they did it together, supporting each other, spelling each other when exhaustion became overwhelming. Vincent joked that he'd never seen his brother change so many diapers, and Marco responded that fatherhood was humbling in the best possible way. Elena's mother Maria appeared unexpectedly one afternoon, having heard through some channel of communication about her new grandson. The reunion was awkward at first. Maria had disapproved of Marco from the beginning, had thought Elena was making a terrible mistake marrying into that world, and their estrangement had been painful for both of them. But seeing her daughter happy, seeing Marco so clearly devoted to his family, seeing her grandsons healthy and loved, softened Maria's opposition. She didn't fully understand or approve of Marco's business dealings, but she couldn't deny that he was a good father and a loving husband, and eventually that was enough. Family dinners became loud, chaotic affairs with 3 generations gathered around the table. Donna telling stories, Vincent teasing everyone mercilessly, Maria offering unsolicited advice about child rearing, Luca chattering about his day at school, and MJ providing a soundtrack of baby noises from his high chair. Marco presided over these gatherings with obvious satisfaction, his hand frequently finding Elena's under the table, squeezing gently as if to remind himself that this was real, that his family was finally complete. The bakery continued to thrive, becoming a neighborhood institution. Elena had hired a manager so she could cut back her hours after MJ was born, but she still went in several times a week, needing the creative outlet and the satisfaction of building something with her own hands. Marco encouraged this, sometimes bringing the boys to visit, Luca helping to decorate cookies while MJ napped in a carrier strapped to his father's chest. Customers loved seeing the intimidating Marco Valentino reduced to baby talk and covered in cookie crumbs, and Elena loved seeing this softer side of him, the man he had become through the process of being a father and a husband. Detective James Carter, the FBI agent who had been investigating the Valentino family for years, showed up at the bakery one afternoon about 6 months after MJ's birth. Elena's heart sank when she recognized him, remembering their last conversation and the veiled threats about cooperation. But Carter's demeanor was different this time, less aggressive, more resigned. "I'm closing my investigation," he said without preamble, accepting the coffee she offered but waving away the pastry. "After 3 years of digging, I can't make a case that would hold up in court. Your husband has been very careful about legitimizing his operations. The money's clean, the businesses are legal, and anything that isn't is so well hidden that I'd need a miracle to find it. You got lucky, Mrs. Valentino? Or maybe you didn't, maybe Marco really is going straight. Either way, I'm done." Elena didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to defend Marco, to insist that he had changed, that he was building something legitimate for his son's future. But she also knew that Carter wouldn't believe her, that the past was complicated and couldn't be erased with good intentions. So she just nodded, accepting the information, and Carter left without finishing his coffee. When she told Marco about the encounter that evening, he was quiet for a long time. "I'm not going to pretend I was ever a saint," he said finally, watching MJ sleep in his arms while Luca played with building blocks on the floor. "I did things I'm not proud of, things that were necessary in the world I came from but that I don't want my sons to ever know about. But I meant what I said, Elena. I'm building something different, something better. Not because the FBI was investigating but because I have too much to lose now. My family, you, Luca, MJ, even your mother and mine, you're what matters. Everything else is just money and power, and I've learned the hard way that those things are meaningless if you don't have people to share them with." It was the most honest he'd ever been about his past and his choices, and Elena appreciated that honesty even as it reminded her of how complicated their life was, how their love story was built on foundations that weren't entirely solid. But she had made her choice, had committed to this life and this man, and she wasn't going to second-guess herself now. Not when she had 2 beautiful children and a husband who loved her, not when she had built a life that was messy and complicated but also rich and full and exactly what she needed. Life settled into a comfortable routine over the next year. Luca started first grade at the academy, making friends and excelling in his classes. MJ grew from a fussy baby into a happy toddler, walking and talking and developing a personality that was somehow both stubborn and charming. The bakery expanded, adding a second location across town. Marco's businesses continued to grow and legitimize, and Vincent began dating a nice woman named Isabella who worked in security and who, to everyone's surprise, actually understood and accepted the complicated nature of the Valentino family. Vincent eventually married Isabella, and their wedding was the social event of the season, with Elena serving as one of the planners and creating all the desserts. Maria became a permanent fixture in their lives, softening with age and spoiling her grandsons shamelessly. The bakery expanded to 4 locations, becoming a city-wide institution, and Elena published that cookbook, dedicating it to Donna's memory and Marco's support. Marco's transformation was complete. He was now known as a legitimate businessman, a philanthropist who supported community programs and children's charities, a family man who was more likely to be found at his son's soccer games than in smoky back rooms making deals. The past wasn't erased. There were still people who remembered, still whispers about the Valentino family and their history, but it was past, not present, and Marco had built something new on top of those old foundations. On their 15th wedding anniversary, or their 20th if you counted the first marriage, Marco surprised Elena with a trip back to Italy, to the small village where his grandparents had come from. They walked the narrow streets where Donna had played as a child, visited the church where Marco's ancestors had been married, ate at tiny trattorias where the owners remembered the Valentino name and toasted their health. It was a pilgrimage to their shared history, a reconnection with roots, and a reminder that family was about more than just the present moment. It was about the long chain of people who had come before and the legacy they were building for those who would come after. Standing in the village square at sunset, Elena leaned against Marco and thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a young waitress and a dangerous man falling improbably in love, through marriage and fear and her desperate flight into the unknown, through 5 years of separation and the shocking reunion at the farmer's market, through all the struggles and compromises and small victories that had followed. It had been a complicated path, full of wrong turns and detours, but it had led them here to this moment, to this life they had built together through sheer determination and love. "Do you ever regret it?" Marco asked quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "The complications, the difficulties, everything you had to accept to be with me?" Elena considered the question seriously because she owed him honesty. "I regret the time we lost," she said finally. "I regret the pain I caused you and the years Luca didn't have his father. But regret us? Regret this life we've built? Never. Not for a single moment." Marco pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "I regret not being the man you needed the first time around. I regret not seeing how scared you were, not understanding what I was asking you to accept. But I don't regret the journey that brought us back together because I think we needed to be apart to appreciate what we have now. The Marco you married at 24 was arrogant and careless with your feelings. The Marco who found you again at the farmer's market had learned what loss felt like and was determined never to feel it again. And the Marco standing here now?" He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm the man you made me, Elena. You and our sons. You're the reason I'm better." They stood there in the Italian twilight, two people who had loved and lost and found each other again, who had built something lasting out of the broken pieces of their past. The village bells rang out the hour, clear and sweet, and somewhere in the distance, someone was singing an old song that Donna used to hum while she cooked. Elena closed her eyes and let herself feel grateful, for second chances, for love that survived separation, for children who were the best of both of them, for a life that was complicated and messy and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. When they returned home, Luca and MJ greeted them at the airport with homemade welcome signs and stories about everything that had happened while they were gone. Vincent and Isabella had watched them, and judging by the boys' excitement level, had been far more permissive than their parents would have been. But they were safe and happy and so excited to see their parents that Elena felt tears prick her eyes. This, she thought, watching Marco scoop MJ up while Luca grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the car while talking a mile a minute. This was what she had been so afraid of losing that she had run away from it. This family, this love, this sense of belonging to something larger than herself. And now that she had it back, had fought for it and earned it and learned to trust it, she would never take it for granted again. Years later, when Luca graduated from culinary school and announced his intention to open his own restaurant, a partnership with his mother's bakery that would showcase both their talents, Elena stood in the crowd with Marco, Vincent, Isabella, Maria, and a squirming teenage MJ, and felt the circle complete itself. She was passing on to her son what Donna had passed on to her. A love of creating beautiful things, a respect for tradition, and the understanding that food was about more than sustenance. It was about family and love and the stories we tell through what we make with our own hands. Marco squeezed her hand as Luca gave his speech, thanking his parents for their support and his grandmother Donna, gone now for years but never forgotten, for teaching him that food was love made visible. Elena squeezed back, and in that simple gesture passed all the things she couldn't say out loud: gratitude for his patience, appreciation for the man he had become, love that had only deepened with time and experience. The restaurant opened to rave reviews, becoming an instant success that combined Elena's pastries with Luca's innovative Italian cuisine. On opening night, standing in the dining room full of friends and family, Elena looked around at the life she had built. The businesses thriving, the children grown and confident, the husband who still looked at her like she was the center of his universe, the family that had embraced her and forgiven her and made her one of their own. MJ, now a college student studying business with plans to help manage the family's various enterprises, raised a glass in a toast. "To family," he said, his young voice strong and clear. "To the generations that came before us and the ones that will come after. To my grandmother Donna, who taught us that love and good food can heal anything. To my mother, who never gave up on us even when things were hard. And to my father, who proved that people can change, can grow, can become better versions of themselves when they have the right reasons." Everyone drank to that, and Elena felt Marco's arm come around her waist, pulling her close. She leaned into him, solid and real and still capable of making her heart race with a look. They had come so far from that morning at the farmer's market, from the young couple who had loved passionately but not wisely, from the separated people carrying years of hurt and regret. They had found their way back to each other and built something lasting, something real, something worth all the pain and fear and struggle it had taken to get here. And as the evening wore on, filled with laughter and stories and the kind of joy that comes from being surrounded by people who love you, Elena thought about that day 10 years ago when Luca had stumbled toward a display of colorful peppers and Marco had caught him. That moment of connection, of recognition, of two lives colliding in a crowded market had led to all of this. The tears and the triumph, the fear and the faith, the breaking apart and the coming back together. It had been worth it. Every moment of pain, every sleepless night, every doubt and fear and struggle had been worth it for this. A family dinner full of love and laughter, a life built on honesty and trust, a future stretching ahead full of possibility. Marco caught her eye across the room and smiled, and in that smile she saw everything they had been, everything they were, and everything they would be. Partners, parents, lovers, friends. Two people who had found each other, lost each other, and found each other again, who had learned that love wasn't just a feeling but a choice, a commitment, a daily decision to show up and do the work and build something that could weather any storm. And as the night drew to a close and the family began to drift home, Elena took one last look around the restaurant, her son's restaurant, her family's legacy, the physical manifestation of everything they had built together, and felt a profound sense of peace. This was her life. Complicated, imperfect, sometimes scary, often chaotic, but hers. Chosen deliberately, fought for fiercely, built with love and determination and the kind of stubborn hope that refuses to accept that broken things can't be mended. She had run away from Marco Valentino 10 years ago, terrified of his world and uncertain of her place in it. She had hidden their son, built a separate life, convinced herself that safety and love couldn't coexist. But that day at the farmer's market had changed everything, had forced her to face what she had run from and discover that the man she feared had become the man she needed, that the world she rejected had room for her after all, that the love she thought was impossible was actually the most real thing in her life. 5 years after divorce, she had seen the Mafia boss at the market and couldn't hide her son. And in that moment of exposure, of vulnerability, of past colliding with present, they had all been given a second chance. A chance to build a family, to choose love over fear, to prove that people can change and grow and become better versions of themselves when they have the right reasons. And they had taken that chance, both of them, and turned it into this. A life worth living, a love worth fighting for, a family worth everything they had endured to create it. As they drove home that night, MJ asleep in the back seat and the city lights streaming past the windows, Marco reached over and took Elena's hand. No words were necessary. They both knew what the other was thinking, what they were feeling: gratitude, love, contentment, and the deep satisfaction of knowing they had made it, had survived and thrived, had turned their second chance into something beautiful and lasting. And in the quiet of that car, with their son sleeping peacefully behind them and their life spread out before them like a promise, Elena finally let go of the last of her fear, the final remnants of doubt. She was home. She was safe. She was loved. And she would never run away again.